Now that we know who generally is going to be using our product, we are able to get specific. So this is going to be in our language, and we're going to talk about who we are and are not going to service in this project. It's not to say that we can't address them in other projects, but for the purposes of this thing that we're going to do, this behavioral change, we're going to put them outside. And we do this via a format of what we call limitations. These are binary 0-1 things that are true or not true that enable us to be able to use a service. These are the people who we're just not going to consider right now because they're not able to use our service. So if we look at something like Uber, a good example is, hey, I have to have a smartphone. If I don't have a smartphone with power and connectivity, then I can't use your service. And Uber has said, hey, we're okay with that. There are some folks over there who can't use our service because they don't have smartphones, and we're generally all right with that. So there are lots of other 0-1 things that must be true if we use a case like Uber. For example, when they came out in the US, you had to have an electronic form of payment. This was such a big limitation. Hey, if you don't have an electronic form of payment, you can't use it. They actually had to change it in order to go into other markets. So for example, in India, Mexico, Ukraine, you can pay for an Uber with cash. Why? Because they were excluding too many people. And so they made a business decision to remove that limitation. And again, that's just a business choice. Limitations will change over time. And it's something that we'll talk through with our stakeholders to figure out, hey, who is it okay that I'm going to set aside? There are other things for Uber. You have to be somewhere that Uber services. You have to want to go somewhere that they're willing to drive you. You have to be at a time of day when there are Uber drivers on the road. You have to be able to physically, literally get into the back of an Uber. That last one is really important because it highlights one of the really important functions of limitations. It's not just about saying, here are the people we're not going to serve. It's also helping us check our own biases and whether we're comfortable with saying, hey, I'm not going to serve those people. So when Uber says, hey, I'm not going to service folks who aren't physically, literally able to get into the back of an Uber, then an executive who's asking you to do a project might say, actually, I'm not comfortable with that as a limitation, and you need to be sure that you're actually including those people. That raises an important part about behavioral statements in general. Behavioral statements are a negotiation between us and our stakeholders. If you think about where strategy fits in the beginning of the side process, it's the handoff from the business model to the behavioral model, right? From, hey, here are the behaviors we're going to monetize over to, hey, here's how we're going to go create those behaviors. And so there'll be a lot of work and pushback from your stakeholders to say, hey, what do we really mean here? It's incredibly important that we're actually being really specific about the thing we're talking about. Are you okay with me not taking folks who don't have an electronic form of payment? No? Okay, then I have to build in ways to do that. This sets up the guardrails for us to figure out what are we actually doing here, and limitations are a really important part of that process. So one, they help us understand who we're not serving, and then two, they help us check our biases to make sure we're comfortable with the decisions that we're making with respect to this project. Now again, that doesn't mean they can't be served elsewhere. So for example, inside of Uber, you could be taking a behavioral statement and saying, Matt, you're going to worry about the folks who are physically, literally able to get in the back of an Uber, and someone else is going to be focusing on people who are not physically, literally able to get back of an Uber. So those limitations are project specific. They're about the thing that I specifically am doing within the confines of this particular behavior change effort. If you're struggling with limitations, again, close your eyes and imagine someone using your product or service. What's true about that person? Then, does that have to be true? Hey, I imagine that this person's using a phone. Do they have to be using a phone? Yes. Great, that's a limitation. Oh no, they could actually be accessing it from a computer. Oh, okay, so maybe that's not a limitation. It's more about a connected device. You can ask yourself those sort of questions. And this is where behavioral science is a team sport. We do this alongside other people. Having other people question you is a really important thing. And it's an important part of behavioral statements. Behavioral statements should provoke thoughtful, difficult questions that we have to grapple with. If you come to preliminary sort of consensus, if everybody agrees on a behavioral statement right out of the gate, I'm usually quite a bit worried. Because what it really means is we're usually coming to some form of false consensus. We think we're agreeing, but it means we haven't really given the rigor to say, hey, there's actually small things in here that are going to become big later. Remember, drift happens even off small things. So we want some productive disagreement here. We want some questioning. We want some sort of, do you mean this? Do you mean that? What about this? What about that? Those are the kinds of things we want to see, and limitations is a good place for those to come out. Remember, Limitations is in our language, not in the language of the user. So this is a place where we can be incredibly specific and should be. I often say, hey, your limitations should be a SQL query. It should be something that you can put into a database and that a data scientist could say, yes, someone definitely does or definitely does not qualify based on this particular limitation. So for my earlier example, when we talk about they have to live in LA, hey, we can be very precise about that means that their address is in the following zip codes, right? Their home address is in the following zip codes, and they spend at least 50% of time in that home, and they pay the bills in that home, and whatever is true. So we can actually be very prescriptive here, and it's important to do that. Generally speaking, when you start to get to pilot stages and later, your data scientists and the people that are helping you select who you're going to pilot on are going to use these limitations to make sure that your population is the one that you want. So you have to make sure that these are really precise 0-1 binary things. They're not pressures. So one of the ones that sometimes people suggest when I do this exercise with folks is they'll say, oh, you have to have a certain amount of money. And I guess at some level that's true. You do have to have technically the amount of money needed to pay for your Uber. But cost, the idea that Ubers could be cheaper or more expensive or be seen as cheaper or more expensive, that goes up and down between people. It's not a 0-1 variable. I could perceive Ubers as quite expensive. You could perceive Ubers as quite cheap. And that's a difference between us. That's a pressure, not a limitation. Limitations are 0-1 binary objective things that we all should agree whether someone is in or out based on some sort of true definition of whether they fit.